Support comes from Thomas Nelson Community College, now becoming Virginia Peninsula Community College, the first choice to start a bachelor's degree since tuition is one-third the cost of four-year schools. More at tncc.edu.
Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, partnering with donors from all walks of life to improve southeastern Virginia through grants, scholarships, and leadership initiatives. Learn more at hamptonroadscf.org.
Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. September 15th through October 15th each year is National Hispanic Heritage Month, a time to celebrate the culture, arts, music, and history of the Hispanic and Latinx community in the United States. So how much do you know about the Hispanic community in this country? Do you know that 4 in 5 Latinx people are U.S. citizens? How about 42% of U.S. Latinx adults have some college education? Or 72% of Latinx people speak English proficiently? Up next on Another View, a deep dive into the Hispanic and Latinx community in the United States and its relationship to the African American community. Stay tuned. Another View will be right back after this news from NPR and WHRV News.
Discussing today's topics from an African American perspective, this is Another View.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. So, I always have to start with something that's happening in the community, and I really think particularly the citizens of Norfolk, you're going to want to know about this. There's been a study going on for a couple of years now looking at how in Norfolk we walk, ride, and roll, meaning bicycles, and talking about transportation. It's called Multimodal Norfolk, and they had a survey that was out. More than 800 people have responded thus far, and they're having an opportunity for you to hear about the responses and where we go from here. So find out what's next for Multimodal Norfolk. There will be 4 public meetings. 2 are in person and 2 are virtual. And the in-person meeting, first one is this coming Monday, October the 18th at First Baptist Church, Berkeley. That's at 706 Berkeley Avenue Extension. It is from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Then on Tuesday the 19th, you have 2 opportunities to go virtual from noon to 1:30 or from 6 to 7:30. And you can find the login information at multimodalnorfolk.com. That's multimodalnorfolk.com. And then finally, another in-person meeting on Monday, October 25th at the Kroc Center. That's on Ballantyne Boulevard, and it is from 6 until 7:30 p.m. Get involved. Find out what's happening in your city. Folks who live in the city of Norfolk, the great city of Norfolk. And yes, I am a little biased because I live in Norfolk, but I do want you all to come out and find out what's going on and what's next to improve our city. So do you know why National Hispanic Heritage Month starts in the middle of September? Do you know the difference between Hispanic, Latino, Latina, Latinx, and the proper use for each term? How much does the African American community share in common with the Hispanic community? Are we Black and brown together? Just some of the questions we'll answer today as we take a deep dive into the Hispanic and Latinx community. Please welcome to Another View, Ana Luz Williams, Interim Associate Director of Black and Latinx Initiatives at the Office of Intercultural Relations with Old Dominion University. That's a title, girl.
That is a title.
How are you, Ana?
Good.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Me, Barbara.
Entrepreneur and Director of Community Relations with Selecta Radio, Ms. Olga Torres. Hi, Olga.
Hi.
How are you?
Oh, I'm excited.
I'm so excited to have you. And the News Director for WHRO Public Media, Ms. Mechelle Hankerson. Hey, Mechelle, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Thank you, ladies, so much for joining me today. I'm so excited about this conversation because I'm going to learn a lot from you all. And so I'm hoping, audience, you will get involved. The number to call to ask your questions is 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. So Ana, I'm going to start with you. First, let's talk about these terms.
Yes.
What is Hispanic? What is Latino? What is Latina? And what is Latinx?
Okay. So These terms have been around for many, many years, Latinx being kind of more of the new term. But the first term that we were labeled with was Hispanic. And that term itself has to do with the language that we speak. So anyone who is associated to Spain, so the language of Spanish, and those were the people who were grouped together and called Hispanic.
So that's pretty geographically very, very large.
Yes, very, very large.
Okay.
And it encompasses basically everyone who speaks the Spanish language.
Okay.
But that language became a little that term became a little controversial when people were like, well, we don't want to be associated with Spain because Spain was our oppressor, or they colonized us. And so a lot of people started thinking about, we need a new term, something that's going to incorporate everyone, but again, not associate us with the colonists.
Okay.
And so Latino came about, or Latina, because the Spanish language has gender. And so when we think of gender, usually we think of people. But for Hispanic people or Latino people, when we think of gender, we think of language. So, for example, this table is feminine.
Oh, how do you determine that the table's feminine?
So, I was a Spanish teacher for 20 years, so I can tell you this. So this is la mesa, right? So the word ends in A. And so if the word in Spanish ends in A, it's considered feminine.
Ah.
And if it ends in O or any other letter, it's considered masculine. But again, having no actual male and female attachment because the table is an inanimate object, right? And so this is one of the hardest concepts to teach because people are like, well, this is not a girl, this is not a boy. And we say, okay, remember, gender is about language. It is not about people, right?
So Hispanic then, so when is it correct to say Hispanic? When is it correct to say Latinx or any of the other Latin variations? And the X came about, my understanding is, and tell me if I'm wrong, that I read that particularly when the LGBTQ plus community added Latinx because they wanted to be more inclusive than male, female.
Yes. And so the term Latino and Latina, because it ends in O and A, people associated it with male and female. Okay. So when the LGBTQIA community said, well, we need something gender inclusive, I don't know if they didn't realize, but the term Latino with an O encompasses everyone.
Ah, interesting.
So in language, if it ends in O, it encompasses everyone. The only difference is if a female is, if you're addressing a female, then that changes to an A. Right. So that's where Latino and Latina come into play.
But in terms, Olga, of if in everyday conversation, if I called you Hispanic, would I be incorrect?
I don't think it's called incorrect. I mean, that's what you know. That's what you know. That's what you've been, trained, to recognize. And so for me, it's not wrong. I think sometimes the person that's receiving the message is the one who decides if it's right or wrong. Ah. You see what I mean?
Okay.
It's who you identify with, right? What label you identify with. So it's a self-identifying term. And so if I want to call myself Latinx because I don't want to include gender per se, I can use that. But it's a term that's only used with 3% of the population. And it's usually really used in academia. So in areas of academics where we use language that is gender neutral or, sensitive to all people.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So Mechelle, you are Mexican, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And Olga, you are
Puerto Rican.
And Ana, you are
Dominican.
Are you guys supposed, in quote unquote, to get along because you're Latino, or is there are there factions or differences between the countries? Let's talk to Mechelle for a little bit because we haven't heard from her much.
Yeah, so I would say there definitely are kind of the same way that the Black community might experience colorism. Well, first of all, colorism does exist in the Latino community because we have, especially like in the Dominican Republic, people tend to be darker because they are closer to the Caribbean. That's just how that area was colonized. But there are definitely like perceived hierarchies in the Latino community. We were talking before this about Puerto Ricans, how they are automatically U.S. citizens. And so that creates some sort of perceived hierarchy within the Latino communities or nationalities. And I think too, this is just my kind of theory. I don't know if it's true, but it seems as if the closer you are to the United States, the better people think you are when it comes to Latino nationalities.
So that would mean then, but there's so much consternation in terms of Mexicans. So
yes.
But they're close. Aren't they the closest?
Yeah. I think it's...
by land. By land, yeah. But,
by land, yes.
I think it's determined by the Latino community, right?
Okay.
You know,
so that's within the Latino community.
Yeah, outside
that
of the
feel
Latino community, right? Everyone's Puerto Rican or everyone's Mexican. There's no difference to them. They're just brown and they speak Spanish. But internally within the Latino community, we understand there's a difference between being Mexican and being Puerto Rican. There's a difference between being from South America and being from Central America. And I think because of the way the United States interacts with these countries, the closer you can get to those, whether by paperwork like citizenship or geographically, the better off you are considered.
So, okay, what are some of the differences? I mean, why is there a difference between Puerto Ricans and Mexicans outside of the fact that it's just two different geographical locations? Right. What else is different?
Well, you know, the difference are, for example, food. So the music that we listen to, the clothes that we wear, not just because we're in the Caribbean, but our influences, you know, are similar yet different. For example, as I understand it, in the Mexican community, their big influence is the Native Americans that would live there when, you know, the colonizers arrived. Mm-hmm. So that's a huge influence. There were hierarchies there as it were. And so that's a big influence in their foods. For example, in Puerto Rico, the food is not spicy. You don't cook spicy food. You add spice to it if you want it. Where in Mexico, you know, it's part of it. It's like, you're not a real Mexican if you don't eat spicy food, or, you know, and that's obviously that's a stereotypical, you know, but so culture. And so the Caribbean is, you know, that was sort of like the port of entry, you know, so the first, you know, some of the first ports were in the Caribbean where the Africans, you know, enslaved Africans arrived. Mm-hmm. Many of them stayed there and many of them went on to the different, you know, parts of, you know, the new America, the new land. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so the African food and culture and in many of our countries, there is an influence of the African, you know, food in that culture, words, instruments, things like that, like the drums, obviously. And so the Caribbean, I don't know, it was an island and there was more freedom, I suppose, to, you know, explore and to share. But there was also, you know, the hidden agenda or having to keep a low profile. So, for example, the music of the Caribbean has more of the African, you know, beat and influence, because on their free time, they found, you know, the ingredients, if you will, to build those instruments that were more close to and similar to where they were in Africa. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's like one example alone. There's just so many different nuances.
So where do the Dominicans fit into this?
Okay, so the Dominican Republic was the first island where Columbus landed with the African slaves, and so the African slave trade at that time, many people don't know that there were over 12 million Africans that were bought over in the transatlantic slave trade, and only about 400,000 of those Africans came to the United States. So when we learn about slavery, we only learn about what happened here in the United States, but it was a global transaction. And so the Caribbean was the first area that that was colonized because they were rich in gold. They were rich in natural resources, spices. We have the rum, the triangular, slave trade. All of that came to play in the Caribbean. And so Dominican Republic is an island that shares their island with another country. So we share our island with Haiti. And so the French colonized the western part of the country, and the Spaniards colonized the eastern part of the country. And so when they talk about skin color in our country, we have so many different possibilities, because you had 3 different races combining. And so you had the Spaniards, you had the native Indian, which were the Taino Indians, and you had the African slave. And so because of that, we're considered an ethnicity and not a race. So when they ask us what our race is, we really can't determine. So we self-identify. So I self-identify as an Afro-Latina because I have African heritage and European heritage. I actually went and did a 23andMe because I was like, I need to know what I am. And so, when we think about those things, and I actually also have about 9% Taino Indian, which they say is one of the native people who have disappeared. And that is not true because I am here.
There you are.
Okay. And so we don't get to learn that in history when we're growing up, because we're living here in America. And so we learn American history, and when we get to, global, a global perspective, we're already in high school and we've already established our thoughts on that.
So, Mechelle, when you fill out the census, then, because Hispanic is not a race,
Right.
What do you put down in terms of race, or do you just skip the question?
So I don't skip the question. I'm a little different in that I'm Black and white. And so even if I wasn't Hispanic, like there hasn't always been a box for me. So when there's an option to mark 2 races, that's what I do. Usually I just mark other. That seems to be the most accurate based on what they're looking for. And then I mark, yes, I'm Hispanic. And but yeah, it's tough because, census and other places where they gather demographic data, when I was early in my school career, it was always confusing. There was never one box, or they say don't mark more than one box. Well, then what do I do?
Right.
And for a while, I seem to remember that they didn't break out the Latino question. So it would be like, you are Black, you are white, or you are Latino, but you can't be more than one.
More than one. Yeah.
Which is tough.
So, Olga, what do you do?
I mark other.
Okay.
I am other, literally. And I've always known it. But, a while ago when I went to City Hall to get married, the lady behind the counter marked me as white. And I'm like, so I looked at, my soon-to-be husband, I didn't know I was white.
Yeah. I had the same experience.
Yeah, it's just really weird. So the other person decided for me because that's what was there and that's what she saw.
And Ana, you were talking about when your daughter was born.
Yes.
They also determined, because you wouldn't check the box.
Right. And I'm a little bit of a, I don't know, I like to push the buttons. I like to push the envelope a little bit. And so I have biracial children. So my husband is Black and I'm Latina. And so anytime my children were born, I would mark them as Latino and Black, right? And so I would leave race empty and just put Latina for myself, or Hispanic. And so when I got my records, you get the records and the baby's going home, and then it said white. And then I said, huh? And so I went, you made a mistake on my form. And she goes, oh, I'm sorry. We have to check the race box. And so I was like, well, can I check 3 boxes? And she said, no, you can only check 1 box. And I said,
and she determined that it should be white.
So then she determined that it should be white because of the color of my skin.
Wow.
But my afro was all out. When you're in the hospital, you have no choice but to have the afro all out.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. Are you Latina or Latino? And what has been your experience, particularly as it relates to the African American community? So, ladies, I'm going to ask this of each of you.
Okay.
Do Black people and brown people get along? Are we Black and brown together? And I'll start with you, Ana.
Well, yes, I believe so. We are part of each other. Like I said before, the African slaves were our ancestors. And so there are some Hispanics, I will say, that may not identify with African Americans, and that may be where the conflict comes in. But as far as I'm concerned, I think that we all are a part of each other.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Olga?
I agree with that. And I think, it's a personal journey. It's a personal journey and experience for everyone. So I was born in Puerto Rico and I moved here when I was 13. And so before I left Puerto Rico, they were trying to scare me of, what the Black people may do to me. Literally, I'm sorry, but that's the truth. Yeah. I'm not, this. We're having a conversation,
we're having
right?
A conversation.
So we were in fear, and
What did they tell you? Do you remember some of the things they told you?
Yeah, some of the things. It was just they just put the fear, of God in you. It was like, be careful, and it's not about trust. It's just that they could harm you, they could hurt you, that they didn't like you, and my mom said, Black boys only wanted one thing and one thing only. Seriously, she said that. I know, Mommy, if you're listening, I'm sorry, but you did it. You said it. And, it's just like, that's all it was. So, it was fear, and it was like taboo, so it's like, because that's all it's like, oh my God, seriously, I would just think that it's like, it's got to be more than that. So for me, it's always been, like literally a journey and a yearning for, bringing us together, because it's more about what we have in common than we don't. Mm-hmm. So for me, in my personal journey, is we are together. We are in this together.
Mechelle?
Yeah, I definitely feel that way. I think what I've seen more in my lifetime is, not just in my lifetime, just in my life, is that Latinos and Black people experience a lot of the same social conditions, right? Like, we have income inequality that we experience in similar ways, education inequities that we experience in similar ways. Mm-hmm. The way people treat Black people because they are Black versus the way people treat Latino people because they are Latino. The details are different, right? They might hit Latino people about immigration, and then they might talk about Black people like, you got to let slavery go. It's not so bad, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But that it has the same impact. It has the same effect, which is to other these groups that are really trying to work in a system that does not work for them. And the impact of that is very similar for both groups. And so I think in that sense, we're all in this together. And I think that has become more clear to both groups.
Especially after George Floyd and so forth, because you saw a lot of that coming together in terms of people coming together to just say this is just wrong.
And you saw some Latino people kind of grouped into that movement. Vanessa Guillen, I'm not saying her name correctly, but Vanessa Guillen, thank you, in Texas was a Latina who was not the same situation as George Floyd, but a very similar movement around her death.
So, Ana, what about language? If it is the desire of the Hispanic community to assimilate into America as they come into America, do you speak Spanish at home? Do you speak Spanish on the street? How does that work?
So for me, the interesting part is that I didn't know that. Well, I knew I was American. I always knew I was American. But in my household, my parents were both Dominican. So I'm a first-generation American. And growing up, I didn't really have the American experience. So I didn't eat hamburgers. I didn't do fries. It was rice, beans, meat. It was, you're going to eat Dominican, you're going to eat plantains. And so my experience growing up as a Dominican American was really mostly Dominican. But then I started to kind of veer off and feel like I lived a double life. Okay, so I was born in New York City. My parents were both Dominican. They did not speak any English.
At all.
And my mother didn't learn English till about, I want to say to my brother was about 6, because he didn't know any Spanish. So my mom had 3 children, and we learned English and Spanish at the same time. So Spanish is my first language, although I don't remember it being my first language. It was what my parents spoke. And then I went to kindergarten like everybody else and learned English. And so when I talked to my brothers at home, I spoke in English because we were in the same school and we just spoke in English. And then when I spoke with my parents, it was all in Spanish.
In the same household?
In the same household. And so we knew that when we spoke to our parents, we had to speak in Spanish. But when we spoke to our friends and our peers, it was all English. And then I became this family translator. So at a very, very early age, because my parents were navigating this, this sea of another language and another culture, I became their tour guide, their translator. I would take them to their doctor's appointments, if they had any appointments, whether they were applying for assistance or whatever, I had to speak to them in the equivalent language to English at the age of 6.
Wow.
Okay. And so it was something where I had to catch on to these words so quickly because I had to explain to them, this is your medical, your medical experience. And so the doctors were just amazed. They were like, how do you know how to tell them? I was just like, well, I just kind of give them a general idea. Wow. But I had to learn very, very quickly that both languages were equally important.
Olga, what about in your family?
That's so interesting. I just want to add something real quickly.
Sure.
I work as an interpreter. So, interpreter, translator,
yes,
two different things.
Two different things, yes.
So it's amazing because the laws, that's a no-no. You can't do that. You can't go to a doctor's office with your child to be your interpreter. You cannot do that. So anyway, I don't want to say anymore. I'm saying, gotta look that up. So language for me, my experience. So I didn't learn. I came from Puerto Rico when I was 13, and because we were already citizens, we studied English in school, but we didn't get to talk and have conversations. We just knew how to read the books and answer questions. When I came here, I was 13. I was so shy, and so I didn't feel comfortable speaking English until I was in my 20s. It just took me even though I graduated and went to high school, I don't know how I did it. It's a blur. So at home, we always spoke Spanish. And then I found my friends that spoke Spanish, and I went to school that had bilingual courses or, some Spanish and English. So I was still transitioning. And so it took me a long time to really feel comfortable,
to do that,
to be able to speak
Mechelle,
Spanish.
did you speak Spanish in your home?
No. My dad, his first language is Spanish. He grew up in Texas. He came to Hampton Roads, joined part of the Navy. I think that may have had something to do with it. He was just not around people who spoke Spanish. And so when he started having kids, being far away from his family, not having a need for himself to use the language, he just kind of figured we don't ever need to know. So we did learn in school. There were phrases that he would use around the house, like close the door, like sit down, don't move, don't touch that. Commands. Yeah. So, we grew up knowing phrases. We found out pretty quickly when I started taking Spanish in school, if I went to him for help, what I was learning was not what he knew, which was really interesting. So I learned, I took Spanish from 6th grade into college, and there was still a language barrier with my family because the Spanish that I was learning was not the Spanish that they knew. The colloquialisms and everything else that would go along with that. If you're just joining us, we're talking about the relationship between the African American and Hispanic and Latinx communities as we observe National Hispanic Heritage Month. My guests are Ana Luz Williams, Interim Associate Director of Black and Latinx Initiatives, Office of Intercultural Relations with Old Dominion University, entrepreneur and Director of Community Relations with Selecta Radio, Ms. Olga Torres, and News Director for WHRO Public Media, Ms. Mechelle Hankerson. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Give us a call. I'm curious, do you think that there is a divide between the Black and Brown community, or should we join together even closer in terms of being a stronger force within this country? 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. I want to know what you guys think about the whole idea of
of our country becoming like some of the European countries where you have English and French, or should we have English and Spanish here?
Absolutely. I think so. And again, being the group that has become the majority in terms of, populations in the United States that are immigrants, we are speaking Spanish here. As I was an educator for 20 years, a Spanish teacher, and believe it or not, because of that do not speak Spanish sentiment, our children are losing that skill. And I call it a skill because it has opened so many doors for me as an educator, as a professional, as a human being, being able to communicate with more people and explain to them, different things that keep us together.
I don't have the luxury of hiding the fact that I'm African American because of the color of my skin. Have you ever been in a situation where you have not denied, but maybe put to the back your Hispanic heritage in order to be able to compete, for a job, for instance, or some other social issue that if people knew, it would become a problem for you? Has that ever happened to you?
That's really interesting. I can't think of it. It has always been an asset. I'm thinking, and I think that is a really interesting point that you're kind of bringing up. It's always been an asset to know Spanish, to even in social situations, it's cool that your family makes their own tortillas, teach me, stuff like that. It's never looked down upon. It's always that's awesome. That's so cool. I'm Afro-Latina, so I'm also Black. It's not the same when someone knows that you're Black. There is not that interest in tradition and culture. So that's really interesting.
And that's a very interesting point you brought up. Yeah, so they want to hear about the culture from your Hispanic roots, but they don't want to hear about the culture from your Black roots.
Yeah, they're not as interested.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. Olga.
Two things.
Go ahead.
Real quick.
No, go ahead.
So language. Talking back to my history. So when I came to the States, the thing that I encountered that I felt oppressed about was if someone heard you speaking Spanish, especially the African American, folks in whatever, it's stop talking Spanish because you may be talking about me. I mean, that was so intimidating and so scary because, you're going to get beat up because you're speaking Spanish. That was my experience, when I was growing up in New Jersey, going to high school and even.
It's kind of the same reaction people have when they're in a nail salon, a Vietnamese nail salon.
Right.
And they're speaking Vietnamese, that people feel like, you're talking about me.
I know.
Stop doing that.
It's terrible. It's that's an assumption, it's you're so hurt that you're looking to place blame, on someone else because you're hurting about something, and I welcome everyone to just be open, to learning, because now, as Ana Luz was saying, Spanish, it's going to be, it already is. It's not official, but it's already the second language in the United States because of the population. And when you speak Spanish at work, it's a shame when they take advantage of you and they don't give you a little bit extra more money. I know here at my platform because you have the ability to resolve problems for them. Just saying.
Yeah, good point. Go ahead, Anna. You want to add to that?
And absolutely. I mean, when we're talking about language and speaking with other groups, a lot of the times they look at me and they're like, "Oh, you speak Spanish?" And I'm like, yes, I can speak Spanish. I think that once I got married and I lost my surname, so I lost my last name, which was Rodriguez, very Hispanic last name, no question about it, right?
Yeah.
But when you look at me, you can't determine if I'm Hispanic, if I'm Black, if I'm white. So when I got married to a Black man, my last name became Williams. And so
they really are confused about you.
So they're looking at me and, they're trying to ask me in a really nice way what I am. Sometimes I'll wear my hair straight. Sometimes I'll wear my hair curly. Sometimes I'll wear it out. And I mean, it just causes the looks. You should see, I do twist and everybody's like, oh. And, it's funny to me. I'm kind of like a little envelope pusher. But when, like Mechelle said, when I lost my Rodriguez last name, I felt sad because, now I send out a resume. Nobody knows that I'm Hispanic. So I kind of lost my Hispanic identity by losing my last name, because that's what I identified with, a Rodriguez. I'm a Rodriguez. And so, yes, I speak fluent Spanish, and I can, when they hear me speak, then they're like, oh yeah, she's Latina.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Our phone lines are lit up. Hey, Will Leviste, I think we know you. How are you?
Hey, brother. ¿Cómo estás?
So now, Will, you are Dominican, correct?
Yes, my late mother, Eudora Ramos.
Yes.
So my full name would be Wilbur Francisco Leviste Ramos.
Wow.
And my father was born in the United States, African American, but raised in St. Martin. So his people's from St. Martin. And, so my siblings, for the most part, we were born in Brooklyn and raised in Brooklyn.
Woo-hoo.
Yeah, and I had two older siblings who were raised in St. Martin. In the Caribbean, yep.
So, Will, you are a dark-skinned brother.
Absolutely.
I would assume most people think of you as Black and not as Hispanic. Or is that incorrect?
Yeah, I mean, coming up in Brooklyn, the advantages and disadvantages of being in an area with so much diversity is, you see different types of people, and there's a sensitivity, but it's still a lot of confusion. So, for example, when people would see me in school as a kid, they would automatically think I was Black as in Southern heritage. Right. But then they hear my mother speaking with her accent, and they'd be like, whoa, what's going on? And so many times my mother would be, associated as being from Panama, because that's what people knew, Panamanians, or they knew Puerto Ricans, but they wouldn't often identify her correctly as a Dominican, and she was a very proud Dominican woman, so she would let you know, and so we had to navigate all of that. So when I hear the conversation about the difficulties of fitting in, that's a very real thing, and a big part of why it's real is because even in Latin American countries, the way that they address and deal with Afros, who what we are called in many of the countries, is being invisible. And the fact of the matter is that I think 95% of our African ancestors that came through the Middle Passage went down to Latin America. There's only 5% that came to North America, to the United States and Canada. So that's a big problem, is that there's this invisibility that goes on, acting as if we don't exist. And so when you try to come now to this country and try to fit into the American context of African Americans being from the South or being from the Caribbean, it can just get very confusing. And
we still are invisible.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. Just look at Telemundo. Look at Telemundo, and you see it. It's a major, major problem that only recently you've heard people being brave enough to start addressing it. Honestly, I think the National Hispanic Journalists Organization, I think last year with the uprising with George Floyd's assassination, with his murder, people got a sense of consciousness and really started talking a little bit more upfront about this issue. But Afro-Latinos oftentimes are made invisible and acting as if you don't exist. And then you come to this country, and then how do you navigate that? And that was essentially my mother's story. She essentially decided to align herself and was very much telling us that all African peoples are united. We are all African peoples. And she aligned herself with the African American community, though she still spoke Spanish frequently and mastered both languages. She could read and write both languages. So, yeah.
So is that common to? Hey, Will, I want you to hang on, okay? Don't go anywhere. We might put you back on hold for just a minute, but don't go anywhere. But is that common that within your the various communities that there's a decision made as to whether to associate with the Black community or identify with the Black community? As in addition to, I guess I should say, your Hispanic heritage.
Yes, here in America, yes, because they for us, nationality is really who we identify with as a people. So we all know we all speak Spanish, but when I ask Olga, what are you? She's going to say Puerto Rican, and I'm going to say Dominican, even though we weren't. Well, she was born there. I wasn't born there, and Mechelle wasn't born there,
right.
And so we identify with that flag. We identify with that, right, with that lineage. But here in America, we're asked. Okay, so either we're asked or not asked. And we're lumped into these groups. And so we don't get to self-identify. And it's all based on what you look like. It's not based on where you come from. It's not based on who your parents are. It's just, what do you look like?
Right. So, Olga, is passing then, it was a big thing in the African-American community a lot of times, because the lighter you were, the easier it was to navigate through society. Is passing an issue in the Hispanic community?
Definitely. I think many people have used that to their advantage. Passing as white. And, I'm white. Some people even deny, that they're Latino, that they have a sand of black in their roots. And you can see it in their features, but they will still deny it. They will not speak Spanish. I don't know anything about that. I don't speak Spanish. They take offense if you try to speak to them in Spanish. So yeah, a lot of people have taken advantage of, that assumption that if they see you that you're white, then I pass as white. And trust me, that continues to happen today.
It just kind of makes life easier for some people, Mechelle, you think?
Yeah, I think so. I'm thinking about my dad, who looks black. If you saw my dad walking down the street, you'd think he's just a black man. And it's really interesting because it feels like in our family, he chose to be Mexican. People will say it's not right to say things, but they'll be like, well, I didn't know you were black because you didn't act black. I didn't know your dad was black because you guys don't act black. But they could tell we were some sort of Hispanic by how we acted at home, I guess. So I do think you have to choose. And even when you choose, sometimes people still choose for you,
Wow. Cheryl joins us from Virginia Beach. Hi, Cheryl. You on the air.
Hi.
Hi.
I am, I'm from southwestern New Mexico. And here I am in Hampton Roads because, the Marine Corps is lovely. I grew up, I have the very Irish traits, but, my family, they have red, type 4 hair. And, some of them are very dark and some of us are very light. And, the language barrier that you were talking about as far as coming from Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic, it's very similar out there because, at home, we're speaking Spanish. And then when we're out and about or with our siblings or our cousins or whatever, we're, speaking Spanglish, basically. I didn't even know that what I spoke wasn't really Spanish until I was going to see my grandmother in Southern Chihuahua. And then, going into college with a Hondureño professor, and they would speak to me in Spanish, but I would answer them in English. And it's very frustrating whenever, my grandmother would say, ay, qué tonta, ¿por qué no tragas? And she would call me an idiot for not speaking Spanish with her, but I'm like, I'm not an idiot and I am talking to you. But it's very different. And then coming out here and all of these different Latina and Hispanic people are together, and all of the shadeism and the colorism that comes with it is just, it's so powerful, where people could, my darker cousins or friends or what have you, they would speak their minds and they would be seen as angry or what have you. But I could say the same thing for them and be heard because I'm the little white-skinned, red-headed, green-eyed girl.
Cheryl, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm gonna have to cut you off just a little bit because we're almost out of time, and my panel is like chomping at the bit to respond to what you're saying. Ana, I mean, because it goes back again to that, the darker your skin, the different way that you are perceived.
Yes. And my mom, and this was one of my very, very early memories of my mother. My mother was a Black Dominican, and she used to wear makeup that was 2 shades too light for her skin. And so, we would see her like putting it on her face, on her neck, on her arms. I'm like, Mom, what are you doing? And, when we would say, Mom, you're Black. And she would, I'm not Black, I'm Dominican. And she would be angry about it. And it wasn't until I went to college and I started to receive my education that I understood, here in America, being associated with Black means to be associated with slavery. And my mom was considered a slave in her country because of the color of her skin. And so Dominicans or even just dark-skinned Hispanics may feel like I have to deny that part of myself so that I'm not treated a certain way. And then you have my children who are Black and Hispanic, and they can't fit in any box. So they're not Black enough for the Black. They're not Hispanic enough for the Hispanics.
Wow.
And they have a really hard time. And I say, you identify with who you feel you are.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, how do you and your husband navigate that? That's really good. Okay.
I wanted to say something real briefly. There is this Spanish phrase that goes like this: mejorar la raza.
Oh my God, yes. I was told that all the time.
Okay, what does that mean?
Mejorar la raza means to better the race. What do you think that means?
The lighter you are, the better the race.
Exactly.
Yes.
And that's something that I heard just the other day, maybe 2 months ago, come out of someone that I know, out of her mouth. And I'm like, oh my God, we're still saying things like that.
Mm-hmm.
How do we raise each of our communities when that is still the mentality? Mechelle.
Ooh, that's tough. I don't.
I know, young one.
I don't think I have an answer for that. I mean, I think the younger people are right. Like I could check like any box on the census, right? And I think we will reach a point where there is not going to be an option to say things like that, because what does that even mean if everyone is just all mixed up? And I think that is where we're headed as a society, is that, people are having families outside of their culture and luckily ignoring things like that. And I think we'll just reach a natural point where things like that are irrelevant because it just isn't realistic.
We got about 5 minutes left, and I want to ask each of you the same question, and that is, tell me one thing about the Latinx or Hispanic community that you wish other people knew about your heritage, about your lives, about your community. One thing that you can think of. Ana.
I would say, I used to say this to my friends and everything, we are the ultimate connector, because at least I feel like I can relate to the Black community. I can relate to the white community. I can relate to the Hispanic community. And I really try to educate myself about the indigenous community. And so education is key, I think, is if you don't know, if you're afraid, learn something. Pick up a book. The internet is at your fingertips. Hey, that device you have in your hand, that phone, it'll give you a plethora of information. And so that for me is the key, education.
I would say we're about family. Family is very important to us. And, that makes us all human. Because in your family, everyone's family is important to you. And if it's not your biological family, you make your own family. So for us as a community, family values are very important.
Mechelle.
Yeah, I would say, I hope this doesn't sound too negative, but, when we talk about language, a lot of people think that is what makes you Latino. If you speak Spanish, then you are Latino. And that's just, it's not true. There are a lot of reasons why parents don't pass down that language and why young children don't learn their language and their culture. And I think that is another thing. Google it. You can learn all about it. But, discredit someone's identity because they don't present it the way that you want
them to present it. Will, I want to ask you that same question. If I hope you heard me, and that is, tell me something about the community, the Hispanic community, that you wish other people knew.
Yeah, that Black people and Indigenous people are critical at the root of Hispanic culture. You can't remove the drum, and a lot of people don't know that the first Black president in North America was not Barack Obama. It was actually Mexico's second president.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
You got to forget his name. You look it up, but that was the first Black president in Mexico, and they just recently recognized Black people in a couple of years ago. That just tells you about the invisibility that's going on in Latin America. So I wish that would be critical to turn that around and actually deal with it. These shows are critical to doing that.
Thank you. I never asked you, Will, did you speak Spanish in your household?
Not bad words.
We can relate.
I had the same school experience of trying to learn Spanish in school, and it's not the same. And again, I was part of that first generation when my mother came over. They didn't really teach their children Spanish because they were taught to assimilate and that it would mix your children up. She came over in the 40s, like in the 1940s. So many of us who are my age don't know the language. That's something that came more into vogue in the 60s. But yeah, I know a lot of bad words.
So we'll have to have you back soon. We'll do another roundtable and maybe bring everybody back and do a nostalgia show. How about that?
Yeah.
Yes. Gracias.
That's Will Levis. Thank you so very, very much for joining us. We do appreciate that. Ladies, this has been an incredible conversation. I just have learned so much. And so I'm going to ask my two Spanish-speaking panelists, Mechelle, if you don't mind, close us out. Say something in Spanish to us and then tell me what you said. We got 30 seconds, so you each get 15.
Hola familia, aquí está Ana Luz. Feliz mes de herencia hispana y que celebren. Estamos en la última semana, pero todavía celebramos todos los días somos latinos.
That was beautiful. What'd you say?
I said I was basically wishing everyone a happy Hispanic Heritage Month. And even though we're at the end of the month, we are Latinos every day and we celebrate our culture every day.
Beautiful. Olga?
Me siento muy orgullosa de estar aquí con estas dos mujeres maravillosas.
I can tell that was gorgeous. I don't even know what you said. What did you say?
I am so happy to be here with these two wonderful ladies.
That is wonderful. Thank you. Thank you all so very much.
And you.
Absolutely.
For joining us. I really, truly appreciate it. So we were just talking with Ana Luz Williams, Olga Torres, and Mechelle Hankerson. Thanks so very much for joining us. And thank you for those of you listening in today. We unpacked a lot about the Hispanic and Latinx community in this country and in our community. And it is my hope that by learning about each other, we will develop a deeper understanding and respect for one another. Do me a favor, share the show with a friend. Go to anotherviewradio.org and download the podcast. And while you're there, please sign up for our eView newsletter. It's a once-a-week reminder of upcoming shows. Next week on Another View, the president of Old Dominion University, Dr. Brian Hemphill. Our theme music is an original composition created especially for Another View by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Todd Washburn is our audio engineer, and Dr. Barry Graham answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. You know what? I'll keep reminding you until everyone is vaccinated. Please, if you are not vaccinated yet, get your shot. And then do me a favor, call me and tell me about it when we get together again next Thursday at noon for Another View.
Support comes from Thomas Nelson Community College, now becoming Virginia Peninsula Community College, the first choice to start a career. Gain skills in fields like cybersecurity and education. More at tncc.edu.
Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, carrying out your charitable wishes forever, whether it's helping shelter animals, feeding the homeless, enhancing the arts, or supporting students. Learn more at leaveabequest.org.